there are a lot of ways to estimate defensive gun uses, and we'll get into some of those ways and the problems with each different method later in the show. But the CDC noted all this stuff in the initial statement that it had. Like it said, there's different ways of measuring. They give you just different results, but they included, here is a range that was found in a paper that we commissioned, the CDC, and it was between 60,000 and 2.5 million. And here's a link to go and read the paper if you want more information, which you would think would be the whole point of this section on the web. Like, you're trying to help people be informed, and linking to a scientific review of research is a pretty good way of doing it, because the research paper itself goes into how these estimates are calculated, where they come from, and it's not as though they're trying to. They don't endorse CLEC's numbers. They don't endorse the lower end numbers. They weren't taking a position on how many uses there are a year. They were just noting that here's what the scientific research community has come up with to this point on how many there are. And there's, different ways of looking at it, and it's still an open controversy. Whereas the new language now notes all the same stuff about how it's, there's different ways of measuring it. And then it just says more research is needed, instead of giving people any sort of resource to look into the research that already exists and make up their own minds about it. And I think that, while you're right that the new language is fairly innocuous in that it doesn't take a side, it's not as though they endorse the gun violence archives count, which, by the way, is down at like 2,000 per year. Is a wild outlier from everyone else's. And we'll get into, again, how they get to those numbers and issues and strengths and weaknesses of it later in the show. But the problem to me when I look at that change is they went from giving people information and for the resources of their own creation, right? It wasn't like they just sent people to Gary CLEC's studies. No, they sent people to a CDC commission review of the research. And it went from that to just giving them no information. I mean, you could, in theory, go to any controversial subject that has different approaches in the scientific community for coming up with answers, and put in language that says there's controversy and more research is needed. But that's not really useful, is it, to the public? Like, that doesn't really fulfill the CDC's mission, does it?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, the point of the website is to give people, first of all, very simple, basic information and then point them elsewhere. It's kind of odd, especially that not only did they remove the range, but they also removed the link that sent people elsewhere.
Think if they did this for gun deaths, right? There's
right.
different ways of measuring gun murder in the United States. The FBI has a different way of doing it than the CDC does. And there is a continuing controversy over which one is better. And people will cite, one or the other. And so the CDC's website could say, well, there's different ways of measuring this, and there's an ongoing controversy. So more research is needed, instead of giving their own statistics. But they don't do that, right? No. And I think people would be very upset if they did do that. So that's why, even though the statement at the end isn't making a controversial claim, to me, the change is still pretty significant.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that. I mean, but I will say, just because the range is so large, I mean, like, if you look at the FBI murder and manslaughter count and compare it with the CDC homicide count, they're different because they're using a little different definitions, and they tend to be off by, I don't know, 10% or something like that, 5 or 10%. Here you do have a range that goes from 60,000 up to 2.5 million, so that's a factor of close to 50.
That's fair.
I think you could make a case, like, if you were writing it from scratch from the very beginning, and you just said, these are so all over the place that it's not even worth giving a number. We're just going to include a link to explaining some of the different things, and people can go elsewhere if they want it. I don't think anybody would have gotten upset about that. But when you take something that has concrete numbers in it, including a number that people in the gun rights community tend to see as a major citation for them, a major piece of evidence for the way they see the world, and you have that on there for years, and then you take it off and you do it under pressure from gun rights activists, and then this fairly predictably does manage to get out into the public view that this happened. I mean, that's just a mess. That's bad for the CDC, and it's bad for their legitimacy if they want to be creating research that's going to affect these topics and affect public policy.